Welcome to the Confident Retirement Podcast. Is doing the most important things alone a good idea? How comfy are you with your choices when it comes to life's biggest decisions? What is real peace of mind with financial confidence, and how can you get it? Chris Fleming and Mark Peachy are the founders of LPF Advisors in Sarasota, Florida. On the show, they bring together the best and brightest minds to share with you how to have a more confident financial picture. They empower listeners with simple, common sense and financial wisdom. And now, here are your hosts from LPF Advisors.
Hey, I want to welcome everybody to the Confident Retirement Podcast brought to you by LPF Advisors. I'm your host here, as always, Chris Fleming, and I have the honor of hosting Jeffrey Katz to the podcast today. His law practice, based in Maryland, focuses on estates, trust, and guardianship issues for their clients, with an emphasis on good results and efficient lawyering work. Jeffrey, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Welcome to the show. Let's jump in. Let's have some fun. So I'm sure you have a very interesting history. Maybe take me through your backstory on what led you to where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. So I went to law school in Chicago and then went down to the University of Miami, got my LLM in taxation, and I started up working for a small accounting firm by the name of KPMG. And actually, it wasn't quite that small. It was one of the largest firms at the time.
Yeah.
I was doing M&A work, so I was doing some pretty large mergers. We worked on Marriott, a big hardware chain called Heckinger's, and the last one, MCI. MCI didn't go that well. It was actually turned into the largest accounting fraud in the history of public accounting. And so they fired the partner I was working for, and they dissolved and disbanded our practice group and sort of sent everyone to the four proverbial corners of the tax universe. Now, that is my roommate from law school. So he had worked at a place called Houston Natural Gas, and shortly after getting there, they changed the name to Enron, and his prior employer had been Arthur Andersen. So he had a really, really hard time. But I called this guy up and I was like, hey, my future trajectory in public accounting has come to an abrupt halt, and I know you had a sort of similar circumstance. He said, you really should just kind of go back to to straight law practice, stay away from this public accounting thing, and which to me was great because I like the law and I like the finance, and for me I was like having an answer that put together for folks. And for me, tax and estate was really the area that I gravitated most towards because there was always an answer. Like we always came up with, was it taxable, was it not taxable, was it included as an item of income? I became one of these like tax junkies, and so I really enjoyed and helping people get to a better outcome for their families and removing some of those frictional costs, expenses associated with dealing with passing wealth or growing that wealth. To me, it really got me excited, and still gets me excited today. And so I'm kind of like this tax estate wonk, I guess, and I still really love what I do every day, and I'm excited.
Yeah, that had to be some kind of an experience. I'm sure, like they had to find some kind of scapegoat. Or like to someone we had blamed it on somebody, not you personally, but I just.
No, I mean, it was clearly like the firm, and it wasn't our firm, the accounting firm. It was the underlying client was doing terrible things. We got Sarbanes-Oxley when they came back in and they changed the rules, and so it was like they were making up income that so they could drive their stock price higher, right. And they were paying taxes on the things. They were paying taxes on all this fictitious income, and after it was discovered, they went back and amended their tax returns and got millions, if not billions of dollars back. So it's just like like what? Why
right.
Just insane. So
yeah, that's gonna throw up a red flag.
Yeah, no one's over-reporting their income. People are trying to under-report. You guys are claiming income you didn't actually make. Doesn't make any sense, right? And auditors aren't looking for that, and frankly, tax practitioners we just assume that you're telling us about the income. You're not increasing the income for some unknown reason. So
yeah. That's wild. Actually, that's wild. Thanks for bringing that up. That's a good story. So maybe, is there something that you know now with where you are today that you wish you knew when you started out in your law practice? Maybe if you could go back in time and give the younger you some advice. What do you think that might be?
So, like when I started out, I went to work for a small firm when I left KPMG, and there was like two attorneys, and they were doing trust and estate work. And I learned it there. When I left, I had the top three corporate clients. Actually, the only three corporate clients came with me. And the biggest challenge I had at that point was keeping their files from falling over because I literally had three files. So I went and I bought a bookend, which kept these files from like toppling. And so within a couple of weeks, I was adding more and more and more files. And within a month or two, I had somehow been appointed to run a construction company in receivership by the local circuit court. And so At 29, I'm running a 35-man construction firm, knowing nothing about construction or real estate or anything that they're doing, and I'm going on hard hat tours. And so the thing is, like, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know that I was in over my head. Like, I just had no idea. But I was like, you know what? I have a law degree. I'm ambitious. I can handle this. And we got through. We got the company through. We filed all their tax returns. We, got people paid. We completed other projects. And I think there was a lot of tenacity and grit. And I don't know that you could teach people that. I think, if anything, I probably spent too much money on marketing when I started. I had not enough time and money, developing relationships. I regret buying like expensive computer equipment. The thing that I still regret is I bought a $27,000 phone system at one point. I was told I needed this ridiculously expensive phone system so we could track our time. And I immediately had an out-of-date, 2 months later, I immediately had an out-of-date phone system. And they kept telling me I needed more upgrades and things. And then they tried some computer servers. And it was just, so I found that, buying technology was just a huge hole in the ocean you just threw money into continuously. And so when they started moving away from owning equipment to renting, using like SaaS-based systems, being able to operationalize without actually owning it and having, that was a much better path for me. And even for someone who is starting out now, like, I think the barriers to entry are a lot lower because you don't have these upfront capital costs. You want to buy expensive computer systems and phone systems and, these AIs. And so I think if I was starting today, I would probably be a lot further ahead if I were to restart now than where I was then. But it's been a pretty good run for the last 22 years. We're up to I think we have 16 employees, and we've got more work than we can handle, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So,
yeah, well, and you have the experiences, so and you have the good stories, Jeff.
Oh yeah, we've had some great stories.
So then I guess I'm curious, how did you come to determine the core focus of your firm's services? Was it because the clients that you were getting fell into those categories, or was it because of passion you had around them? Or did it just evolve organically that way? How did that happen?
So we got set up with the local referral service, and they were referring us a variety of, all kinds of things. And some stuff I liked, some stuff I didn't like. I was in court a lot. I hated going to court. I would just sit in the courthouse for hours waiting to have the cases called. And to me, it was just a complete waste of time, really inefficient. And then you couldn't bring your phone in. They're like, nope, you just got to sit here. And I just wound up reading the newspaper. And I did talk to a lot of attorneys, and I talked to a lot of litigators, and the sense was that there was a need for folks who understood, the finance side of it, the tax side of it, to come and help the litigation people. And so really, I think the focus grew as a result of the litigators I was talking and interacting and engaging with who said, hey, there's just not enough folks who do this. And like most tax attorneys aren't really that interesting. Like, they're not good in front of people, or they're just not, engaged, or, the accounting, there's sort of like a perception of accountants as being boring and folks that you kind of go to and not necessarily fun people or super engaged. And so they're sort of necessary evils where, you want to keep them around when you need them, get rid of them when you don't. So I think that was sort of how the practice grew. And over the years, we've gotten more and more of a reputation for getting these done. And then we began developing systems and processes to really allow us to scale that type of work. And so now, we do over 500 estate plans a year, which is an inordinate amount of estate work for a firm of our size, with basically no marketing. I mean, we're not doing seminars, we're not running advertisements. It's word of mouth and referrals that are coming in. And so, I think that really speaks to sort of our depth of knowledge, our perception, our ability to get the work done. But, because we do so many of them, we've got these good systems and processes in place, and people know to refer to us. And so, we'll have clients who call, and for the clients, the first time they've done an estate plan, they ask us all these questions. And, we're like, well, we do 500 of these a year. I mean, I got 10,000 of them that we've done over the last 20 years. I think we know what we're doing. But, in law, we don't say we ever really, achieve perfection. We just keep practicing.
Yeah, right. That's what they call practicing law. So that brings up a good point then is, do you think there's some general misconceptions that clients have about what you do or what you can do for them?
So that's a great question. So the thing is, a lot of people come in, they say, hey, I just want to do a will. I'm a simple guy, and I just need to do a simple estate plan. And the simple guy with the simple estate plan has been married twice and has a family business and has an insurance policy and has $7 to $10 million. But their plan is pretty simple. They just want to give all the money to their family over the next 30 years and endow a small foundation. And all of a sudden, you're like, that's not so simple. Like I said, in your mind, what would complicate things? But even folks who come in with, $1 million in assets and say, hey, I have a pretty straightforward plan. The assets are not super complicated. I've got some life insurance. I've got a retirement account. I've got a home. I want to give it to my spouse and then my kids. We can do those plans. And the question then is, how are we structuring those plans? What are the optics in terms of who's going to serve, how they're going to serve, who's getting the distributions. And so we're looking at things like frictional costs, expenses of administration, taxes. And folks, I think, really have this misconception that, having a will is super easy and the probate process is relatively straightforward. It can be, but in many cases, it's a long, drawn-out process. In Maryland, where we're based, statutory expenses of administration start at 9%, and then drop down to 3.6% on anything that exceeds $20,000. So for someone coming in with $1 million worth of assets, you're looking at a statutory fee of about $40,000, right? And I think that's a lot of money. For a process that shouldn't take that long or be that complicated, and it's a process that 99% of people can avoid just by having some careful planning up front and thinking, hey, tactically, how do we go ahead and give access to these funds and transfer them in a way that benefits my family, doesn't have to go through the court system, doesn't give creditors first dibs of the money, and allows my kids and spouse to stay in the home, unmolested, not being forced out, not being forced to sell the property, not having to relocate to some other jurisdiction as quickly as possible. And most of our clients, we ask people, hey, if you're old and sick, do you want to stay at home or do you want to go to the nursing home? And nobody wants to go to the nursing home. Everyone wants to stay at home. We say, hey, do you want the government coming in and telling you what to do with your money and how you get distributions and when? And they say, no, we don't. And then I asked them, well, when you went to get your driver's license renewed, what kind of experience was that for you? And everyone says, oh, it was horrible. I had to sit in the DMV for 3 hours and, I had to wait and the people there smelled bad and, it was a big mess. And then I'm like, okay, well, it's the same way with state administration. It's a very long, drawn-out process. It's not comfortable. You've had a family member who's passed. Emotionally, it's draining. For the survivor, then you've got all these administrative processes that have been put on top. You've got to do an inventory and an accounting, and you have to keep telling the court what's going on. And if they don't like your answers, then you have to go tell the judge, and it's very stressful. And why would you want to put your family members through that after you've passed? And most of our clients say, well, I wouldn't. I'm like, okay. But I just have a simple plan. And I said, well, the simple plan, the way to simplify that is to think about it tactically. Do we get assets to people with beneficiary designations? Because that's pretty simple. Yeah. Do we give it to them by making them payable on death? Right? That's pretty simple. Do we use a revocable trust because we want to control who gets the money when they get it? Right? That makes a lot more sense. It's a little more complicated, but ultimately it gets you to the goal and objective you're looking to get to.
Mm-hmm. And hasn't COVID elongated or added even more time and complexity onto the probate process? And I know that's been true in Florida. Has that been true where you are?
I think we saw, so when COVID hit, we definitely saw a spike in deaths. And so what happened in many instances, so one, the local morgues here didn't have enough room for all the people who were passing away. Mm-hmm. And they actually wound up turning a couple of local ice rinks into mortuaries where they were just holding people until they figure out what to do with them. The estate planning, or I should say the estate administration offices also did not have the capacity to handle the influx of deaths coming in. And so there was a significant backlog in getting hearings and getting dates. And so while you had a statutory timeline for that process, what could have or would have been a 6-month or 12-month became a 12 to 18 months. So we definitely saw an extended period of time on that. As we kind of got through the pandemic, I think that sort of subsided. I think there was an initial wave of deaths. And then a lot of the folks we saw passing, were really old or really sick, and many of them didn't have a lot in the way of assets. So they were small estates, they weren't necessarily large estates. But I think for us, where we are up here in Maryland, we've got the National Institute of Health, we've got the National Institute of Standards Technology, we had, all the doctors and the physicians who were giving this, and the county we were in basically shut down. Like they shut down all the businesses, and they thought, well, unless you're an essential business, you got to work from home. And so, we've got people who are freaked out, who can't go to see their lawyers, who can't go who can't go grocery shopping. It was completely wrong. So what happened was we actually tripled, our estate planning practice tripled during COVID. We went from like 200 to 600, and then it kind of dropped back down. But we moved all of our consults onto Zoom because we couldn't meet with people in person.
Correct.
And so, for years, for the 18, 19 years prior to this, all of our meetings were in person and people had to schedule. And once we went to Zoom, we kind of unlocked a lot of bandwidth for folks where they could get us the information in advance. We could do the meetings. They didn't have to drive down to our office, spend a half an hour driving, a half an hour coming back, paying the park. And so I think in some respects, the pandemic moved us to a place where people were comfortable doing video conferencing with the attorneys, and we were able to actually get more people, into that process because it was less difficult to enter them in. At the same time, you had people who were freaked out, and they were like, I'm going to die, I can't do it. And then the other challenge we had was getting documents executed because we couldn't do in-person executions. And so up here in Maryland, they actually changed the law to allow remote executions, and they allowed online notarization. And so we started doing those. Some of the banks came back and they weren't accepting them. And so there was some challenges. And we wound up, I think in most cases, actually re-executing everybody who'd done a remote in person. So, because we don't want to figure out what the law is going to be in 50 years or have folks back in and arguing, hey, this was not a proper execution or this was effective for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think that adoption of the virtual meeting thing, that was definitely true in our business as well, where people were skeptical before. And then one of the things that happened with COVID is they became more accepting. And now it is maybe even a first choice in a lot of cases.
Well, so we are routinely asked if we're okay doing an online meeting.
Yeah.
Because people, they really don't want to come in if they don't have to. And for us, it's great. I mean, it gives us more scale and more depth. And I think it's been a great equalizer for clients in terms of getting on and being able to see, us. And we've got these virtual backdrops. It's funny, when I was at KPMG, they spent tens of millions of dollars building out conference rooms in each of their locations. And each of these conference rooms looked like Bennigan's. So they had the big brass pots and plants and things, and the same terrible wallpaper, the same furniture. And they wanted to set up so that the whole firm, anyone in the entire firm could come in, and you would all look like you were in the same exact room because you had the same fixtures and furnishings. So we got these virtual backgrounds. I'm actually sitting on it today. It's got these little circles that flip around. They use them in church services. I got it for $2 on Etsy. All of our staff use this. And so when we're together, we all look like we're sitting in like this virtual, Brady Bunch-like grid, but it's very consistent. And we want to get the same effect that KPMG spent tens of millions of dollars for $2. Yeah. And the clients really like it. I mean, okay, it's very cool, focus on what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, there's a little bit of a halo around my head. So it gives me this sort of angelic.
There we go.
We'll tell you otherwise, but it gives me this sort of angelic.
We need something there. We need something. Yeah. So I'm curious, now every situation's different, but what do you kind of view as being the core essentials for an estate plan? Now, we won't speak in terms of the complexities and stuff like that, but what do you recommend that, every client have? For somebody that maybe doesn't know a lot about that's never done any estate planning, what do you generally suggest?
So the starting point for everybody is to really just take an inventory of what you have and sit down and make a list of the assets and say, hey, I've got bank accounts, brokerage accounts, retirement accounts, life insurance policies. And think not only about the policies you have now, but maybe you switch jobs at some point. Maybe you have an old 401k at a prior employer you've never updated. Take a look at those assets and see, do you really need 4 401ks? Does it make sense to roll them into one 401k? Should we have our current investment advisor do that? And just try to identify what are those assets, mm-hmm. How are they held, how are they titled, are they tenanted by the entirety if you own it with your spouse, are they joint tenants if you own it with someone else? Is there a beneficiary designation? And what's the flow of funds you have set up right now? Because that's not always what people want. So I can't tell how many times we see life insurance policies where folks have named a person who's already deceased as the beneficiary, or they've named their ex-spouse, mm-hmm. right? Or they've named their parents, right, mm-hmm. who are in a nursing home getting medical assistance, long-term care, and they don't understand that when they leave their parents, $2 million, they're going to disqualify them from receipt of that. And they're going to have to privately pay and spend through that money before they get that benefit. And so that's all part of sort of thinking that inventory up front. What are the assets? How are they titled? Who are the named beneficiaries? Once you have an understanding of that, then sitting down to try to address, who's going to get these things? One of the other things that people often overlook, group term life policies. So if you work for a big company, mm-hmm. A lot of these companies will pay out 3 times or 4 times salary. It's a base benefit. A lot of the folks who are working there don't even pay for it. It just comes. Sometimes they give them the option to buy an additional policy. These are great for folks who are not insurable on their own because they come under the group term. So there's often not any type of medical examination that's required. And folks often forget about these when they're going through this process. And so including that in there. And just taking a total view of what are these assets, how much are they worth, right? Who are the named beneficiaries? And from there, you can kind of back into what the planning looks like. And so, we don't do financial planning here. We don't say, well, you should buy this or sell that. But we do say, well, here are the assets. Here's your growth rate. You get a 6% or 7% growth rate. In 8 years, what's that? Is it the rule of 56? that you double your money every, is it 7 or 8?
It's the rule of 72.
Rule of 72. Okay.
Yeah.
Rule of 72. And how long does it take to double your money at 7%? How many years is that?
10 years.
Okay, so 10 years. So someone who's at a $3 million estate today will have a $6 million estate in 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. And in 20 years, they'll have a $12 million estate. And the question then is, well, what are the exemptions, the state tax exemptions or the federal tax exemption where you're located, and are those going to grow at the same rate? And so, while we're not giving financial advice, we're trying to give tactical advice as far as the planning. It's like, well, you may have a tax issue today, you may have a tax issue tomorrow. Can we think about that, in terms of where we're going with this? How do we develop those assets the way they're being held, not necessarily having the attorney tell you what to buy or sell, but how to hold those so that you can grow the asset outside of the estate. We have clients who come in who have startup businesses. The values are very low. They're pre-money, and then they'll say, well, can I do what the PayPal guy did? And I'll say, well, what would the PayPal guy do? Oh, well, the PayPal guy went in and bought 5 million shares of PayPal stock in his Roth IRA at 1/100th of a penny, and now has like $50 billion sitting in his Roth IRA that he's never going to pay income taxes on. Like, can we do that? I'm like well, my answer is, well, do you own PayPal stock? You say no, but
right.
But these are the types of things that if I always say, like, if you had the almanac for Back to the Future, like, would you be, what lines would you be picking for these things, and how would you go? We had one client. He had worked for a company called Sienna, which was a big micro electronics company, and he was there sort of the heyday at the beginning. And so every year he gave his granddaughter the annual exclusion of $10,000 per year. He didn't do it to anyone else in the family because he had this one granddaughter. Over 5 years, he gave her $50,000 of Sienna stock. And Sienna blew up. I mean, the company was just huge. You got, I think, JDS Uniphase. And now the $50,000 of stock that he gave her is worth $8 million, right? And so that was a huge success in terms of his ability to transfer wealth. But it was also really unfair to his other family members because he hasn't given the same types of contributions. Right. And so because of the vagary of the market in terms of what happened, you got a disproportionate distribution or allocation, which really wasn't anyone's goal or objective. And so she literally wound up holding a lottery ticket and her number came up. But if you look at that from a familial perspective, that's not a great outcome. I mean, you have a lot of folks in that family who are unhappy with the fact they got less and she got more, and so there's not a lot of equity in terms of that distribution.
Yeah, and that you bring up a good point there. So I'm sure when you work with clients, a lot of times it can be emotional because families are involved in relationships. So how do you find it best to kind of manage client expectations and emotions when you're guiding them through this process? Because I'm sure some of those conversations can not get heated, but just there's emotions involved.
I mean, so one of the things is we don't use the word death or die, or, we talk about, how you want to pass the asset or grow your legacy, or who's part of that planning process, and, what are the goals and objectives. Clients generally come to us with a sense or conception in terms of what they want to do and how they want to do it. And so it's not that hard. I mean, I think the hardest conversations are where, married couples disagree in terms of who's getting it or the ages they're getting it at. Mm-hmm. And we really do try to encourage folks to not pay out lump sums, large amounts of money, millions of dollars to 18-year-olds. I think that is probably our greatest challenge. It's like, hey, we can set up a trust, a couple $1,000. Let's dole it out over time. Let's have them work with the financial advisor. Right? Let's just kind of gently segue them into the management of this money, because it took you a lifetime to earn this, and we don't want to see them blow it in 6 months or 8 months. Years ago, we had a family. They owned the Weather Channel. They were significantly older than the Weather Channel. They sold the Weather Channel to a group of interests named GE Universal for $4.5 billion, and the family got $160 million from that transaction. Well, Mom and Pa were in their 60s when they received the funds. They didn't know what to do with the money. And they went on a bender in terms of spending spree, and they spent through $65 million in 9 months. Buying, it was like Brewster. Did you ever see the movie Brewster's Millions? Brewster has to spend cash.
Great movie.
Yeah.
Great movie.
To get an even bigger pile of cash. Well, they thought they were Brewster, but there was no secondary pile of cash. Right. And so they were giving money away, and they were buying all kinds of stuff. They were gambling. They were paying for private planes. The husband was buying, the barman and the guy at the boatyard, houses. I mean, doing all kinds of stuff. Nobody told them about the federal gift tax. Like they just so 6 months into it, like, oh, you gave away $6 million. You owe an additional $42 million in federal, gift taxes as a result of your large ass. And they're like, whoa, easy come, easy go. Yeah. So it's kind of an extreme circumstance, but folks who get large amounts of money, you see these TV shows about the proverbial lottery winners who wind up in bankruptcy because they spend their money on stuff. It's crazy. The story that the guy who worked for used to tell me was about the Maharajas in India. And he said, if you ever wanted to bankrupt a Maharaja, the way to do that was to give them a glorious gift. The gift was a white elephant. Mm-hmm. And so white elephants are magnificent, and they're very princely, and everyone wants to see the white elephant. But white elephants eat a lot. Mm-hmm. The bigger the elephant is, the more it consumes. And so if you ever wanted to drive a kingdom into bankruptcy, you would present that kingdom with 3 or 4 of these giant white elephants. The Maharaja would then show it off to everybody. They couldn't get rid of them because it look poor upon them. And the children like to see the elephants. And the elephants would just eat and eat and eat and eat. And so you see folks who have built these empires, and they have to feed the beast with these white elephants. And so, it's interesting from the estate planning perspective, where people, build up this lifestyle, they want to maintain the lifestyle. And so, in our office, we used to say, hey, deep pockets, short arms. The deeper the pockets, the shorter the arm. And those are the people who actually have money at the end of the day, not the freewheeling, free spending folks who have, lived the lifestyle, but haven't necessarily created the legacy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's well said. I like that. So maybe shifting gears a little bit, can you just on a high level, just generally define for us the term guardianship?
Yeah, sure. So a guardian is going to be a person who's going to have physical custody of the person's medical decision-making and or their property. And so what typically happens if someone becomes incapacitated, either they develop dementia or Alzheimer's, or maybe they've got some medical issue, they can't make medical decisions on their own or financial decisions, and they haven't appointed a power of attorney, or they haven't appointed someone to come in and make those decisions for them, the court will come in and will appoint someone, either a conservator or a guardian, to come and make those decisions for that individual. Now, these can be very contested, hotly adjudicated issues, depending on who's being appointed and how they're being appointed. And the person who's being appointed may not necessarily have been the person that the ward would have wanted. Right? Because they didn't specify. You've got folks who are just kind of jockeying for that position. There's a great TV show on Netflix. It's a movie on Netflix called I Care a Lot, and they show this horrible guardian business where they're going on. They're basically having old rich people declared incompetent so they can gain control of their money and put them in these expensive nursing homes and just suck their cash out. So I think it's a little bit of an extreme, but I do think that having someone appointed sort of short circuits that as a process, and it allows you to identify who's going to make decisions for you, how those decisions, how your assets going to be invested. The other way to avoid that, that process beyond a power of attorney, is a revocable trust. Having your assets in a trust and identifying a trustee who can manage and administer those. Now, the thing about guardians and conservators is that their powers are going to be more limited than an appointed power of attorney or an appointed trustee. They'll have to go back and report to the court. They'll have to provide, income reports, and they'll have to, and so it adds an additional level of expense that frankly isn't necessary, if the person appointed is doing a good job and, being transparent.
Right. Can be avoided. Yeah. There's stuff to do. Okay. So let's kind of shift to how you view the business going forward. What would you say maybe is the biggest opportunity for the future of the practice?
I think, so the greatest opportunity I think right now is the fact that the tax laws are changing, and they're changing pretty dramatically over the next couple of years. So under the Trump administration, they raised the federal estate tax exemptions pretty significantly. And so right now we've got almost $13 million of assets that can transfer at the time of death. But the way they set that up, that exemption is going to drop back down to the pre-Trump tax level in 2026. And we actually don't know what that total number is going to be. We think there's something like $6.2 and $6.5 million, but there's a CPI index, and CPI has been all over the place. So, but the long and short of that is that for someone who has $13 million today, who died in 2023 versus dying in 2026, right, that person is going to have potentially an additional $6.5 million of assets that are exposed to federal estate taxation. And, even if you didn't have $13 million today, even if you had like maybe 7 or 8 million today, you would still be over that exemption amount, and you'd still have that, potential for tax. And so
when it sunsets.
Now, what's interesting is the IRS has said, hey, if you go ahead and start planning now, and you do planning and you give those monies away or put them in a trust or lock them down in some way, we're not going to claw back. We're not going to make you pay the tax on it because we don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, we know what the law says, but we're not going to penalize you for taking advantage of the law as it existed at the time. And so, go let your business do what you want. Now, we've had calls from people who have been coming in saying, hey, how do we respond to this? Should we do it now? And we're encouraged, look, this is as good as it's going to get. We don't think, the Republicans are going to come back in to run the House or the Senate anytime soon, or the presidency for the next, at least for the foreseeable 2 years. So, this is a pretty good deal right now, and you should take advantage of the opportunities that are there, because I don't think it's going to get any better. It may get a lot worse. I mean, and if it does get better, we can always go back in and add more planning to it. But take advantage of that opportunity as it exists right now. Like this is try to think of it as those people who refinanced 2 years ago when mortgage interest rates were in the 2s and the 3s versus someone who's looking to refinance now at the 7s. And we talk to people all the time, like, oh man, I wish I'd done this 2 years ago. I mean, my payments would have been half as much, and so they're feeling that pain very real. It's a very real pain right now. Where they've raised these rates because they're saying, oh, well, the economy's not really, it's heated up and people are, the interest rates are too low, money's too cheap, now we're making it more expensive. And so when you think about that, the problem with that from an equity perspective is you have all these people who locked in their mortgages for 30 years at 2% versus people who are trying to refinance now. So you're going to wind up in that respect with folks who are locked in their house, they're not selling their homes, they're not refinancing, they're not moving to the next house because they've got such a good deal. If you think about that in the estate context, people are like, hey, I've got this great opportunity now, I'm taking advantage of it. And then they're also going to not necessarily do future planning going down the road because it's going to get a lot worse. And so, I think we're seeing some acceleration of that planning over the next, 5 years and the next 2 years, where people are trying to take advantage of those high exemptions now. Thinking specifically of that refinance issue, thinking where the rates are now versus where they were.
Yeah. Well, and how many times have you heard, I'm sure you and me also in my practice, if I wish I had done this sooner, if I had like $5 every time somebody told me that, I had more than those people that blew through the 160 million. All right. So on the flip side of that, Jeff, what do you see as kind of your biggest challenge or obstacle for the business? It's something that you guys want to overcome going forward.
Our biggest challenge right now is we actually get more work than we can handle. So we get a lot of work. And so we have a bit of a bottleneck where we get work that comes in faster than we're getting it out. And so we've been scaling. We've actually doubled the size of our office staff over the last couple of years, but we're still, and so we're trying to become more efficient. We outsource some of our phone systems here. We've got an answering service that is doing some of our bookings, and but we're also trying to rethink our processes. So we actually what's interesting about our practice, we spend a lot of time with clients, not just doing the drafting, but actually doing their funding. And so once they've set up a trust, we will spend probably 3 or 4 times as many hours on the funding process as we spend on the drafting process. And so I think we could get better working with financial planners and financial advisors to engage with their clients, because a lot of that is really saying, hey, hey, Mr. Broker, like your client has another $5 million of assets. We would like you to manage it. Could you please transfer that over? Can you put it in the name of the trust? And the brokers we talk to are super excited about this because it's easy money for them to pick up. They're able to consistently manage the assets, right, for the client's interest. The client is being better served by the fact that the assets are all in one location, and we've got a consistent plan of distribution. And so, we spend a lot of time sort of, trying to go ahead and marshal that, and I think we could probably do a better job on our end. We haven't. That's not an area that we've been able to master yet, but we're still working on it. We're still trying to figure out, how do we really get these folks to engage, to implement. Now, on the front end, when people are signing documents, we're doing powers of attorney, healthcare powers, living wills. Then we're also trying to say, hey, can we send these, healthcare powers out to your physician? Is there a specific hospital? And getting that information from clients as well. I think that's super helpful. When they come in to execute, we will have deeds prepared. We're recording those the same day. So we used to do that manually pre-COVID. We would go to the courthouse and record that. That's all going to electronic recording. So that has really, sped up our process. So I think, as people's expectations change in terms of in-person versus online, and as we're able to really build out that system, I think as far as the funding, I think we'll be in a much better place growing and scaling our practice and actually, meeting and exceeding our client needs. So in our office, one of the things we say is, we think that every client experience, every estate plan should be meaningful, should be memorable, it should be measurable. And so, we ask ourselves, have we hit those sort of watermarks on each of these things as we go through? And the area for measurability, like, as far as, percentage of assets, what percentage of assets did we get in the trust before the client died? We would like that number to be 100%.
Yeah, right? Of course.
It's not always 100%, but the closer we get to 100%, like, the better. So, in our mind, like, in an ideal world, the only thing that wouldn't be in the trust would be like causes of action that arose as a result of someone's death, like a wrongful death claim, or maybe an income tax refund, or something, some sort of like esoteric, they hit the publisher's clearing out sweepstakes after they passed and they got a, $1 billion. Like that would be great because those are few and far between from a planning perspective, but really we're going for 100% in terms of funding. That's really
and that is the key to the whole thing. Once it's created, it has to be funded, and otherwise it's pointless, as you know. So that's super important to get to help them to implement it and to get things changed over once the plan's created. Okay.
So the funny thing is we have clients who come in and say, "Hey, I want to do a trust, but I don't want to fund it right now."
Right.
Like, what are you waiting for? And they're like, well, I'm waiting till I die. I'm like, okay, well, what fund will you die? Well, it'll go through probate. I'm like, okay, but if it's going through probate, you're going to pay the probate fees, cost, expense. You're going to spend 12 to 18 months, right? And then you're going to pay the trustee fees, cost. Like, so you've actually doubled your cost. You've extended the amount of time. And so we'll do this. We politely decline those engagements. We say, you know what? Either do a will or do a trust. Having a trust is like being pregnant, right? It's binary. You're either pregnant or you're not. You can't be a little pregnant. We've got 4 kids, and I tell my wife, she understands. Honey, you can't be a little pregnant, right? So the assets are either in the trust or they're not. And if you're not going to fund it, don't do a trust. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it is. There's no point to it. Okay. So if people want to learn more about you, your firm, or contact you, what's the best way for them to do that, Jeff?
So our website is JD Katz. That's J as in Juliet, D as in Delta, K as in Kilo, A as in Alpha, T as in Tango, Z as in Zulu, JDKatz.com. They can reach out to us by phone at 301-913-2948. We do planning throughout the United States. And so we're happy to talk to folks about their planning goals, needs, and objectives.
Okay. Awesome. I want to thank you for taking the time to be here with me today. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. And I want to thank everyone for listening and watching the Confident Retirement Podcast, brought to you by LPF Advisors, where we are raising the financial confidence of everyday people to another level, one show at a time. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Take care. Be well. Jeff, thanks again.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Confident Retirement Podcast with Chris and Mark from LPF Advisors. For more information on them and retiring confidently, please visit lpfadvisors.com. If your ears are pleased and your mind is now at ease, do share the program with your friends and subscribe wherever podcasts are found.